Welcome back to the High Floor Football Podcast. My name is Sam Wagman, and we are continuing our series of Dynasty buys and sells. And this week we are on to the quarterbacks and tight ends. And if you missed our episode last week where we talked about running backs and wide receivers, we touched on guys like DJ Moore. We touched on Brees Hall, which was a really good one. We touched on James Conner. A lot of good guys in that episode. So go on and check that out. That'll be linked in the description of this YouTube video. But tonight we are on to quarterbacks and tight ends. We have a group of three for each of them. If we have some time, we'll fit in a couple extras at the end. But with me, as always, is my co-host, my co-pilot on this podcast, Jay Arsh himself. And Jay, how are you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm doing well. Ready to, talk about the dynasty buy and sells for the, two other positions, the quarterbacks and the tight ends. And like you said, I think the last episode was good. A lot of good conversation there about some interesting players. So hopefully we'll have some more today.
Yes, sir. And absolutely. Before we get started on that, I want to talk about our partner, Underdog Fantasy. And this is the absolute best place to draft. If you're looking to get in on some mock drafts, don't go to some of these other sites and go to mock draft. Go mock draft for some money over at Underdog Fantasy because it's basically the same thing with the opportunity for you to win money. You can hop in, a fast $3 sit and go if you want. You can hop in one of the $5 puppy drafts tournaments when they come out, or you can hop in the big one, the $25 Best Ball Mania 4 with a $15 million prize pool and $3 million to first place. And there's tons of ways to win. There's a bunch of regular season prizes. You should go check it all out. Underdog Fantasy. Make sure to use our code HFF when signing up. And if you click the link in the description of our video, it will bring you straight to the sign up page. And on your first deposit only, you'll receive a 100% match up to $100 for signing up with code HFF. So again, Underdog Fantasy, absolute best place to go. You could talk to Jay about it. Jay was one of the finalists for Best Ball Mania 3 last year, won some nice coin for himself. And too bad he didn't use it to buy more Hawaiian shirts so he could show up in a Hawaiian shirt for this episode. But he absolutely crushed it last year. So if you want to find me and Jay in the best ball streets, go out and play on Underdog Fantasy. But let's jump right into these quarterbacks, man. And we have a good first one to talk about here. And we're going to roll with Kyler Murray to start. Now, Kyler is a little bit of a tricky one, right? He was as high as, I think QB5 or QB4 in the last couple of years. And then just, he got hurt and he's had the injury and, it doesn't seem like it seems like he's going to miss at least a good portion of this upcoming season. So you have to take that into account. Right now, Kyler Murray is set at QB 10 per Fantasy Pros Dynasty ADP. And so why don't you tell me, Jay, do you think that is a fair ranking for Kyler Murray?
I think it's somewhat fair, but I also would say that he's a buy at that price, even given that I think that he's fair with the guys that he's ranked around. Sorry, my light almost fell down there. But I think based on the situation, like you said, he's injured right now. He might miss most of 2023 or part of 2023. And those are advantages in Dynasty, or those are things in Dynasties I think you want to take advantage of. Dynasty is a long game. You're not just playing for the 1 year like regular, redraft leagues or season-long leagues. And so a lot of people will get, will be down a little bit on a player because of something that's happening in their current situation rather than the long-term situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like you alluded to, I mean, Kyler Murray's been in the league for 4 seasons. His first 3, he finished as a top 10 quarterback. And one of those, he finished top 5 in 2020, where he rushed for 11 touchdowns. That right there is something that you can only find with, 2 or 3 other guys in the NFL at quarterback. I mean, having that sort of upside to rush for double-digit touchdowns is exceptional. And the other thing about this is, some people have brought up in Dynasty that Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, at least, the Cardinals are going to have some high draft picks next year. They actually picked up Houston's first-round pick as well. don't let that impact how you think about Kyler Murray, though. Kyler Murray doesn't have to play, even if he doesn't play in Arizona. Kyler Murray is still Kyler Murray. He still
Be
has the same
arguably
talent.
better for him to not be in Arizona as well.
Sure, exactly. And I'm not, predicting that that's necessarily going to happen. They just gave him a big contract extension in the past, year or two. That being said, don't let the situation impact how you view a talented player like Kyler Murray. So I think he is a buy. And I think that you might be able to get him, on the cheap right now for somebody to look at. That team that has Kyler Murray may have already started to make some changes on their roster to combat him missing that 2023 season. If you're able to offer something that's appealing enough to that team who might now have 3 to 4 starting quarterbacks, I think you can get Kyler Murray much cheaper than you'll ever be able to get him when he's healthy or when he's, back on the field.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is a classic case of people forgetting what a solid quarterback is worth in Dynasty. And I don't know if he's an absolute buy at QB10. I do think he's right at that range where I would consider buying him. But at the same time, I'm not sure if I'm ready to put him any higher than QB7. I think I'd probably rather have Trevor Lawrence at this stage. But over a guy like Justin Fields, who for all people talk about him, hasn't really shown us anything, and Deshaun Watson, who's coming off a really tough season last year, and again, we're not really sure. I do think that Kyler is being slightly undervalued. Now, we could see some guys jump up like Anthony Richardson, who's ranked at QB12, but I would rather have Kyler over Dak Prescott. I would rather have Kyler over Bryce Young, Tua Tagovailoa, CJ Stroud, Daniel Jones, all those guys. So part of me is going to say that Kyler is fairly priced, but part of me is also saying he's a buy because there are, a couple guys around him that I would rather have Kyler over. One thing that definitely stood out to me, Kyler still was the number 7 QB in fantasy points per game last year. Still 18.9 fantasy points per game, despite only playing 11 games, despite the fact that his passing touchdowns dropped to 14, which is a little over 1 per game. He's never been a particularly, lethal passing touchdown kind of guy. And yes, his yards per attempt did drop a little bit, but his completion percentage was still up there, 66%. And, the team is still going to pass. And again, like we said, him leaving Arizona might be good for him. And I could foresee a scenario where Arizona chooses, if they get, the number 1 pick next year and Caleb Williams, I could definitely foresee them, looking to move on from Kyler Murray, because bad organizations do stupid things like moving on from quarterbacks that what they are. And I still think Kyler Murray is a good quarterback. So, expected fantasy points per game, 19.17, ranked number 4th in the league. I still think that Kyler Murray has a lot to show us in his career, and he's one of the few quarterbacks that we can depend on to use his legs, though we do have to take into account he might not do that for a couple of years given the injury and what we've seen from quarterbacks coming back from that injury in their first year back. So,
well, yeah, the irony of that situation, if that were to, come to fruition, where if the Cardinals do get the number 1 overall pick and then trade Kyler Murray, would be pretty ironic considering what they did when they had Josh Rosen, got the first overall pick, and then traded Josh Rosen and drafted Kyler Murray. So
turnabout is fair play.
Yeah, the irony would be interesting there. I mean, I think if they were to do so, I think Caleb Williams would be a great pick there, and who knows their relationship with Kyler Murray at that point. But I thought you brought up a good point too with the kind of where he ranks at QB10. I don't think that he necessarily is above, the Trevor Lawrences or the Justin Fields or even Deshaun Watson, in my opinion. I'm relatively high on him in Dynasty, but the only other player I could see really breaking into that top 10 is Anthony Richardson, who you mentioned. So it looks like a clear tier break to me, where, if you're able to get him for a discount, if you're able to get him for less than, maybe a Dak Prescott right now or a Bryce Young right now or some of those guys because they're healthy right now, I think that that's a good move to make. So, yeah.
And look at some of these numbers that Kyler had last year. Completion percentage versus man, 63%, ranked 5th in the NFL. Completion percentage versus zone, 74%, ranked 3rd in the NFL. Accuracy rating versus man, ranked 4th in the NFL. I mean, he is still, a dynamic quarterback. And again, a lot of his dynasty value is going to depend on his rushing output once he gets back. We're going to have to take that into account. But for what Kyler Murray offers you, And if you can afford to accept that this season is likely a bust for Kyler, as he's going to be out, my guess would be at least till October, then he's extremely worth a buy. If you can stash him on your bench, all the power to you. But you have to take into account that he is going to miss a possibly significant portion of this season. But again, Dynasty affords you a lot of flexibility when dealing with something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. All right, let's move on to our next guy, and that is going to be the current Seahawks quarterback. And interesting to me, Pete Carroll made a note to the media that, before the draft, that he told Geno Smith that there was a possibility that the team would take a quarterback in the draft. Now, they did not. What does that mean for Geno Smith, who they gave a 3-year, $105 million extension to? Does that mean that we can depend on Geno, going forward? I think a lot of that is going to probably depend on what his production looks like this year. So Geno is currently going off as QB 18 in Fantasy Pros ranking. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think he's interestingly priced because he's somebody now where I do think it does somewhat matter the build of your team, I guess is what I would say. So, if you're really looking for, if you have a win now team, a team that's ready to go right now, you need to upgrade at quarterback. I think there's not many better options that are available at an affordable cost as there is with Geno Smith. I mean, he could really just have a much better season than he even had last year. And he had a really good season last year. I mean, and it's all about, like you said, what Pete Carroll said about the draft and then what he did during the draft. All they did was help Geno. They had Jackson Smith-Njigba at pick 20. They had Zach Charbonnet, who, we don't love for Kenneth Walker, but that's another, effective playmaker in their offense and a running back that can catch passes probably better than Kenneth Walker can as well. So adding to that element, still has one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL. And, last year he threw for over 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns. He doesn't add too much in the rushing game, but a little bit. I mean, he had a little over like 350 yards last year. So not terrible and can at least, he scored one touchdown last year, but that could be more situational. That could maybe come up if they're really close to the goal line or anything. He's somebody that can at least be used in that sense, but he's not a runner by any means. I think that the price is interesting because I would prefer Geno over Kirk Cousins, who's going right before him. I think Geno has a little bit more long-term value than a guy like Kirk Cousins might if things keep working out in Seattle, and he might be better in the immediate time as well. I'm not as high on Daniel Jones, who's QB 16, 2 spots ahead of Geno. Daniel Jones is a pretty decent fantasy player, so that becomes an interesting conversation. But I also think you can get Geno for a pretty cheap price. I just think that there are probably a lot of teams as well, kind of what I was saying about Kyler, but in a different way, where people were probably surprised by Geno's performance last year and might also have, 2-3 quarterbacks on their team. And Geno might be kind of in the mix, but might be a guy that's expendable for them if they're trying to upgrade another position. So I would be asking the Geno teams, at least for the price, because I think you might be surprised by how cheap you can get a guy like Geno based on the situation. So I think Geno's a buy right now too, again, kind of based on the window that you're in. If you're a team that needs to win now with a quick upgrade at quarterback, I think he's one of the cheaper options you can find.
Yeah, and I think if you talk to, multiple people and ask them how old they think Geno Smith is, I think their answers will surprise you. People I've asked, people I've talked to about Geno Smith have kind of reacted with, the feeling of he's like a 36 or 37-year-old journeyman. Yeah. He's not even 33 yet. I mean, he's younger than guys like Kirk Cousins and Matthew Stafford. So, guys who have been in the league a little bit longer. Actually, Kirk Cousins, I think, came in the same year as Geno, but
it's forgettable to remember when Geno did come in,
I mean, because those first 2 seasons were extremely forgettable, just barely over 3,000 yards passing, not over 60% completion percentage, 6.9 yards per attempt, 13 and 12 passing touchdowns, 31st and 27th in fantasy points per game. But he was up to 8th in fantasy points per game last year. And like you said, he only had the 1 touchdown on 366 rushing yards. But the 30 passing touchdowns is notable to me. I don't think that there is. I think Gino's probably perfectly priced. If I had to nitpick, I'd probably say both Goff and Lance should be ahead of him. Probably Russell Wilson too. Um,
Hmm.
it's tough because again, so I think so much depends on what Gino does in the first 2 months of the season. Like if he looks like Gino last year, he could be a starter for years to come and be a decent high level starter. And Seattle's at a crossroads. So the way that Seattle approached the draft this year is a team that knows they have a chance at heading into a playoff window and they're at a fork in the road. They could either smash through the fork and go on a playoff run, or they could turn the other way and kind of dive back into like a retooling state, with a weakened defense and a little bit of an aging core there. Guys like Tyler Lockett and some guys on the O line. Gino, obviously himself, that defense. Where it's inexperienced at points, it's also old at points. So but they're at a point where they can really take advantage of a playoff window. And I think if Gino shows that he's the guy right away, that 3-year contract, $105 million that they gave him, that's going to look like a bargain, and they're going to renegotiate it after next year.
Yeah.
So we could see a scenario where Gino is kind of the longer term starter in Seattle, for maybe the next 3 to 4 years. And at that point, his dynasty value should be in the mid-teens, and maybe the early teens at that point, because with a guy like Gino who, has 3 really strong guys at wide receiver, 2 really strong running backs, an improving offensive line, and an improving defense. Like that's a very dangerous combination. And you could definitely make the argument that he would be above guys like Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, probably CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, as both face significant hurdles to be relevant fantasy wise. Depending on what happens with Tua Tagovailoa and his injury history, he could be below Gino at that point. So there's an argument that Gino could soar into the mid-teens in a scenario like that. So I do think that there is a little bit of a buy window on Gino. But I also think that there's a little bit of a sell window. And I think it depends who you're talking to, what their opinion is of the Seattle Seahawks and what Geno Smith can do. Because there are some worrying data points. Like, for instance, 46 danger plays and 41 interceptable passes last year, both ranked first in the NFL, the most, at both things. So there were, one can argue that he got extremely lucky. We'll have to see if there's some, regression there. And that could be me looking too much into the data, but, same thing. But he was also one of the best deep ball passers in football last year with, the 5th ranked deep ball completion percentage, 5th pressure completion percentage, 4th in true completion percentage. So, there is a little bit of a window there as well.
Well, and I would say just more narrative wise, this NFL draft really extended Geno's dynasty lifespan because
For sure.
you have to think about also, like you mentioned with wide receivers, I think there was this shorter window for a little bit where it was Tyler Lockett's getting older, DK is great, but who's going to be beside DK? They didn't really have anybody behind those two. If Jackson Smith-Njigba really pops the way that, a lot of us think he can, and he becomes, a real star player, he could really extend Geno's lifespan, as well as I think a big narrative why people thought, me included, that Seattle might take a quarterback in this year's draft was because they were picking up at 5, which I don't think we're really expecting them to be that high in the next couple of years, especially with this team they put together. I mean, they seem to have smashed this draft again. They smashed last year's draft. They have a ton of great young talent. And if they're continuing to be a competitive playoff team, without a trade up, they're not going to be high enough to draft his predecessor ultimately. And a lot of these, quarterbacks that go back into the first, early second, etc., do not always, pan out, at least at as high of a rate as, some of those guys that go at the top. So if they pick somebody 5th overall, I mean, we would seriously be thinking about, okay, this is the time to sell Geno. He's not the future. He's going to, this guy's going to take over at some point soon. But now, I mean, with the added talent that they have, and nobody behind him, I think that his lifespan's really improved. So yeah, I would go try and get Geno if you're a team.
I personally think that if Anthony Richardson had not been picked by the Colts, that the Seahawks were planning to take him at 5. I believe Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll did not say that just to say that. Like, he said that in public to the media that he told Geno Smith that they were possibly going to take a quarterback in the draft. When a coach tells you that is, like, more often than that, that is not a test. That is not, BS. That means they like had a guy that they had their eye on, that they seriously liked, and they were like, if this guy falls to us, we're going to take him. But we know John Schneider. John Schneider does not trade up. He trades down and he trades around, but he does not trade up, especially not in the first round, where it takes a significant amount of capital to move up even one spot. Except for the Chicago Bears, who are idiots and only got a 4th-round pick from Howie Roseman. But, that's another story. But anyways, greatest GM in football. But, I do think that the Seahawks would have taken Anthony Richardson if he was there. What do you think? Do you agree on that?
I mocked him, Anthony Richardson. So yeah,
Yeah.
I
do remember that. I remember that. But yeah, so that is Geno Smith, and I do agree with you that he could be a buy in the correct scenario. I would wait for the first couple months of the season and then try to acquire him, in season, because I think people will be a little bit more amenable if he starts out poorly. I do think that the Seahawks do believe in him as a guy. Maybe if he has like a bad first or second week, go for it.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's move on to our last quarterback. And we're only moving down one spot in the rankings. And we are targeting the former wonderkind and Jay's close personal friend, Jared Goff. So let's talk about this, because this is very interesting. Another guy that a lot of people were pegging a quarterback to was the Detroit Lions. And, it made a lot of sense. Goff is, I believe he's 28 now. He's kind of heading into that range where it's a will he, won't he kind of get it done, get it all together, kind of show why he was the number 1 overall pick 7 years ago. And look, he brought LA to a Super Bowl, didn't win it, showed that he could really, put out an offensive output, comes to Detroit, is expected to be a lame duck starter and only last 1 season. But lo and behold, Goff proves that he can still play. He can still sling it. And, arguably has kind of a career year under Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson there. And I truly think that I truly think that the Lions organization believes, similarly to the Seahawks, that Goff could be their long-term starter, at least for the next, life of a contract. So Goff is ranked at 19th. And again, we have the same questions. Guys like Trey Lance, Kenny Pickett, Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones are all around them. So where do you stand on Jared Goff?
I hate to, sound like similarly to how I did with Geno. I think he's fairly priced, but at the same time, I think that he has a little bit of that like stink on him the same way Geno does, where it's like we got used to these guys not being good. Geno and Jared Goff not being good players. And then they've just turned out to, completely exceed our expectations recently. Jared Goff finished QB 13 in points per game last year, the top 15 option. So, I mean, if you're playing in Superflex leagues, I mean, he's one of the better QB2s you could have had last year. And then you look at, like you said, they didn't invest in the quarterback. They also, Dan Campbell was on Chris Long's podcast, the Green Light. And he was talking about, it wasn't a glowing endorsement of Hendon Hooker. It was pretty much we traded back a couple times and he was still there, is what Dan Campbell said. Typically, you trade up for quarterbacks that you're trying to acquire. They traded back. He was still there, so they thought it was good value. He then went on to continue to say that it's going to be a long time before Hendon Hooker plays, which we all sort of knew with the injury, but that was almost already implied. So I don't know why Dan Campbell had to, go on top of that to be like, it's going to be a long time, because that kind of seems to me like it's not only the injury, that's that we really like our guy. We just picked Hendon Hooker as a backup. He even, I believe, said something like, he could maybe be a good 2 someday or something like that. It was something along the lines of like not implying he's going to be the future starter. And not that we really thought he was after the draft pick, but we all thought Jared was in trouble of competition being added. And I don't know that Hendon Hooker really is competition. He's also locked on to what I think is, a top 10 wide receiver in Amon-Ra St. Brown, a guy who's going, top of the second round in redraft underdog best ball drafts right now. He's, maybe even higher in Dynasty in terms of where he ranks among his peers at wide receiver. So he's locked onto a top target. And like you said, I just kind of think they can win with Jared. And I mean, they did the second half of last year, 28 years old, like you also mentioned, that's 4 years younger than Geno Smith in a quarterback lifespan. That's, if he's able to like hold on to this job, that's a good 5 or 6 years he might have left playing at a high level. And the Lions, we haven't even seen them with Jameson Williams yet. So I don't know. This offense they added Jahmyr Gibbs too, which is also a good weapon for Jared Goff. So I mean, similar conversation with Jared and Geno, where they didn't add competition. All they did was add more weapons for their quarterback. I think in terms of where he's priced, I think it's fair again, but I think he's somebody that you should kind of be gauging the price on and seeing if you can get him for a little bit of a discount, because you roll the dice a little bit. If you're getting him if somebody's viewing him as this 28-year-old quarterback who has 1 year left, and like a short-term answer, you might be able to get Jared Goff for much cheaper, and he could turn into somebody, who plays like, I mean, even look at like Jimmy Garoppolo, even, who's a much lower level quarterback, I would say. Like, he hasn't performed at the same level that Jared Goff has. He's 31 years old, though, and he's still finding himself in like starting situations with value. And Jared Goff, to me, feels that way, where even if he gets replaced in Detroit somehow in the near future, Jared Goff will be playing somewhere for.
He's only 28.
I know, and he'll be playing into his mid-30s, whether it's in Detroit or somewhere else. He's done enough, and he's shown he can be a system quarterback enough. So yeah, I mean, I think he's a good buy. I think where he's priced is fair, but I do think he's somebody that you should be trying to acquire as a QB2, because I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry, it's just kind of a misconception. I feel like where it's like he had a good year last year, but when you put it in terms of like he was one of the better QB2s you could have, like so after those like elite guys, really like the top 12, you had Jared Goff. I mean, you were like in a really good spot, and I don't think that's going to get worse.
Yeah, and look, I mean, outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Goff wasn't throwing to really anybody last year. DeAndre Swift, hurt, not used half the year. DJ Chark, hurt. I can't even remember who else. He was throwing to 3 guys who I can't even remember a single name after they traded away TJ Hawkinson in the first few weeks of the season. Like Shane Zylstra, Brock Wright. Sorry, I lied. I can remember that. I just didn't want to say it. Literally, he was throwing to nobodies. And he finally got Jameson Williams, who recuperated from the torn ACL. Sure, he's not going to have him for 6 games again this year, but they drafted Sam Laporta. They're going to have Jameson Williams. They brought back Marvin Jones. Like, they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, there are a ton of weapons on this team. I'm going to go a step further. I'm not just going to call Jared Goff a buy. I'm going to say he's probably the biggest buy that you could possibly have at the quarterback position right now, because I truly think that he could be a QB1 this year.
Yeah, so I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities at all.
I'm looking back to his stats in 2017 and 2018, QB8 and QB9 in fantasy points per game. Like, he was right there. 64% completion, 62% completion, 4,600 passing yards, 3,800 passing yards. And, the passing touchdowns are right there. He just had, a little bit less luck in the rushing yards department, and his yards per attempt were a little bit down, but I think they're going to be right there. And he's become a more refined passer in the last few years since those seasons as well. So I'm right there with Jared Goff. I think he's a very good quarterback. He was a guy that kind of excelled. And look, he had the most drop passes by any receiving room in the NFL last year, 38. That's 2.24 per game. He had the number one clean pocket accuracy rating, 8.1%. We know all about how good Detroit's offensive line is. There's no reason that shouldn't, continue again this year. So I'm right on there with Jared Goff. Again, he's not going to give you much in the rushing department. I know we've, equated that with super high fantasy success. Great. But there is absolutely no reason why he can't be the QB 12 or, the QB 11 this year in fantasy in a points per game sitting. I truly think that Minnesota's defense is going to be bad. Green Bay's defense is going to be bad. The Bears defense is awful. And I'm not looking at their schedule right now, but I think Detroit is ready to make that push. Again, look, we keep drawing similarities to them and the Seahawks and Geno Smith. I think they're two extremely similar teams. They're both teams that are right on the cusp of massive playoff runs. They just have to smash through that fork in the road, and I think they're going to get it done.
Yeah, and to your point about the non-rushing ability of Jared Goff, I mean, nobody outside that top 12 of quarterbacks are rushers, aside from Daniel Jones, who there are other questions about, because Daniel Jones doesn't put up the sort of passing numbers that any of these guys do. So, but outside of that top 12, there's it's no other rushers. So I mean, you're not necessarily at a big disadvantage that Jared Goff doesn't do that because he's in one of the more productive offenses in the NFL right now. So yeah.
Yep. All right, so that is it for all the quarterbacks. We are going to switch right over to the tight ends, and I want to start with the wonderkind at tight end here. I want to say the best for last. We got a couple guys that we both really like coming down the road, but I want to start with everyone's favorite second-year breakout, and he's in a terrible spot, but I don't really think it matters. Converted fullback Chigozie Okonkwo, who kind of came out of nowhere and was Tennessee's wonderkind at the position last year, breaking out for huge after the catch gains down the field. Guy shows like he runs like an absolute tank. And he is currently at tight end 14 on the tight end Dynasty ECR ranking. So let's dive right into Chigo Okonkwo.
Yeah, I mean, I think tight end 14 seems to be fair, except for, he's around guys that you haven't, seen it from yet. I mean, it's him and the rookies, Cole Kmet, Trey McBride, Greg Dulcich, who also had a really good year. But a guy like Dulcich, the only concern for me really, because he did have a really good rookie season, but now there's a coaching change. Sean Payton's there. They have other tight ends on that team. Is he still going to be the favored target there? So Chig's actually finding himself in a situation where he's one of the only targets in town. I mean, it's him and Treylon Burks and not much else. And that's just going to feed him more opportunities. Clearly, you brought up, his yards after the catch. I'll quote Andrew Cooper, tight end guru on the Twitter space. And just a stat that I found in one of his articles. He says there are currently only 3 tight ends in the league with 3 or more 40-yard plays in a single season. 2018, George Kittle. 2019, Noah Fant. And Chig. And Chig did it as a rookie on 36% of his snaps.
Yep.
So that's the big part with him that is still the unknown that makes him so appealing, is that he wasn't even a full-time player, and he was still giving us, I want to be relative with it because he was giving us interesting stuff for a rookie tight end. He didn't have some huge breakout season. But for a rookie tight end, he had 450 yards, 3 touchdowns. The way he was being used, the yards per route run, the big plays,
first,
all that kind of stuff is what gets you excited about a guy like him. And then, like we just said, Tennessee went and added nobody for whatever reason to their offense and to their passing game. So it really leaves him.
They're wrong. They added the goat of something, mayo and coffee. Levis.
Well, they added Levis, which
goat.
I mean, who knows?
Of putting mayo in his coffee.
Quarterback situation. But yeah, in terms of targets, I mean, he's really the second target on the team, in my opinion, unless Kyle Phillips pops back up again as a target monster, which is possible. But Chig's an interesting buy, and I've tried to buy him from Sam in a dynasty league as well. So he doesn't come on the super cheap. But I'll quote another, one of our guests who we had on, Alfredo Brown. I actually not quote him, but he put up a Twitter poll trying to kind of find the right trade value for Chig. And it seems to be right around like that rookie pick 206,
Okay.
207 is kind of the range for a guy like him. And I think that's really interesting, especially if you're going to pick one of these tight ends in the second round, like Laporta, Mayer. Those guys are both going to have better profiles. They both come in with higher draft capital. But we have seen so many of these tight ends come in with high draft capital or high profiles and not hit in the NFL. And one thing that Chig does have over those guys is we've already seen him be productive at a young age at the tight end position, which we'll talk about with another guy shortly as well. But that's tough to do. I mean, there just aren't too many guys that come in right away and make an impact. So if you haven't done your rookie drafts yet and you haven't at tight end, I mean, trading a late second for him seems appealing. Or just trying to buy him, from the guys that have him, like I said about the quarterbacks too. Chig might be on a roster where, he wasn't expected to be the main tight end and he might be somebody's third or fourth guy. You might be able to find a need on their team and get a guy like him for cheap.
Yeah, and I do think there's something to take away from that fact. Let's put it this way, Okonkwo is a guy that's in a supremely terrible spot, on paper for fantasy. Ryan Tannehill, who, is coming off an injury, had, career lows in pretty much every category across the board last year. Vrabel wants to run the ball. They drafted Tyjae Spears, seemingly affirming that commitment to running the ball. They got a new, but they do have a new analytically inclined GM in Rand Carthon that might be a little bit more pass happy. Maybe the selection of Will Levis means they kind of want to do a little bit more passing of the ball, since Ryan Tannehill has always been kind of an efficiency guy, not a pass volume kind of guy. He did everything on pretty historic efficiency a couple of years ago when he had that really good season that made everyone think he was back. And then the next season, he kind of regressed to what we knew he was. And we're like, oh, okay. But Okonkwo is kind of that guy who benefits in a situation like that. And obviously, Treylon Burks is the number one target there. But truthfully, we didn't see a lot from Treylon Burks that had us truly excited last year either. If anybody got us excited last year, it was Okonkwo. And like you said, they really didn't add anybody on offense. So it's interesting to me. They did draft a left tackle, if I'm remembering correctly, right? They drafted someone to replace Luan.
Well, left guard or tackle, okay. Skoronski, yeah.
Yes, Skoronski, but they did say they think he can play tackle. And that was a big thing with Carthon. He said this guy's a freak. He can play anywhere on the offensive line. Let's stick him at left tackle, even though he has short arms. And Skoronski thinks he's a left tackle. And because I remember looking into him when I thought the Eagles were going to draft him. So, you have that there. If Skoronski's as good as, people think, and, we're on the way to getting this once really, really good offensive line in Tennessee rebuilt, that opens things up a little bit more, so these quarterbacks don't get sacked as much. And Chig, like we said, put up some pretty nice efficiency numbers out there. Number one in yards per route run, number one in yards per reception, number two in yards per target, number three in contested catch rate, number one in fantasy points per route run. So I do think, and number four in QB rating per target as well. So I do think that there is a an expectation that he's going to advance. And then the target rate as well. Target rate when he was on the field, 33.3%. That's a massive target rate. That ranks second. So, on only a 35% snap share, that's some very good numbers there. And truthfully, he's just got to score some touchdowns. If he scores touchdowns, I think he's going to be okay. And I think the Titans are going to have to throw. I don't think the Titans can rely on Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry keeps getting, a year older every single season. His body, at some point, that big body is going to start to break down, and they're going to have to throw the ball. So I do think that Okonkwo is a very interesting guy who I think you could get cheaper than what his ranking suggests.
Yeah, and I'm not making a player comparison here, but just because you brought up the situation, which is about as bad as it gets, and there's no real getting around that. But not the comparison of the player, but Mark Andrews, when Mark Andrews was kind of like getting towards his breakout, a lot of the downside to him, a lot of the negatives people would bring up was, he's on this Ravens offense, this run heavy offense. Lamar Jackson's not a great passer, doesn't throw the ball that much. But it's like if you can be a tight end that you're the number 1 or 2 option on the offense and you're able to get, a significant target share of that offense, that's all that it takes, really. I mean, and especially having the athleticism, which is similar between the two of them. Chig's very athletic, very very big play threat, which is also something that Mark Andrews was earlier in his career. So not comparing the players, but sometimes the bad situations can work out for the tight end because if he can find himself higher on that in that target tree.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to our second tight end. And it is, one of my long favorite guys as a University of Miami graduate. It is David Njoku. And he comes in at tight end 9. So, look, Deshaun Watson came in last year. And as we said, didn't show us anything interesting. He looked rusty. And it was to be a little bit expected coming off a 2-year layoff. But I thought David Njoku looked, pretty damn good. 10.1 fantasy points per game and ranked 8th at the position. Look, again, the bar is really low at the tight end position, guys. if you got 55 or 50 catches and 650 yards and 5 touchdowns, you're a top 7. You're a top 8 guy. Like the bar is really low here. And, Njoku is currently at tight end 9, and you have Kincaid and Freiermuth and Goddard in the spots above him. You have Dulcich, Waller, and Michael Mayer in the spots below him. And as we noted, Evan Ingram's there, Chigozie Okonkwo, Sam Laporta, they're all there around him as well. But, Njoku, who just signed a 4-year, $56 million deal, that's a pretty substantial deal for a tight end to sign. And obviously he improved. Right off the bat. Did he improve enough, though? Why don't
Yeah, I like David Njoku. I do think he's a buy. And it goes back to some of the things that you said. I like to, typically in Dynasty, think of tiers like a lot of people do. And, think if you're getting somebody in a specific tier. And I think that there's a tier drop after David Njoku for the most part. I mean, the Fantasy Pros ECR is a little different because they have Darren Waller, tight end 11. And, I would prefer Darren Waller in most situations, even though he's a little bit older. But I like David Njoku's situation a lot. I mean, you've talked about Deshaun Watson a couple times on the show. I've been buying a lot of Deshaun Watson. I've been buying him in best ball. I've been buying him in Dynasty. Don't love the guy, but it's not, my control over whether he's playing or not. He is playing. And I think he came back rusty. And I think, like you said, it was to be expected. But I don't think that's going to keep up. And I think that's kind of diminished a lot of the Browns' passing weapons. It's because of what we saw last from Deshaun Watson. I think Amari Cooper's going later. I think David Njoku's going later. I think some of these options that, you might be getting at values now, which are not going to be at that same value after a good Deshaun Watson season. So David Njoku is still 26 years old, which is like very young for, a tight end if he's able to produce. He also produced early in his career. In his second season in the NFL, he's had 56 catches, 639 yards, 4 touchdowns, which is a big second season for a young tight end. It was disappointing what he did after that. He took off the next 3 years essentially and, didn't give us too much to work with before his bounce back last year. Like Sam said, I mean, like you said, the tight end position is so like tough to come by guys that can produce. And I really think he's like got a lot of things on his side. It's age. He's got the quarterback, he's got the contract, and he's got the pass production and the athleticism. I mean, these are all things that like you want from these guys. I mean, the guys around him, like the Dalton Schultzes, I don't think Dalton Schultz is as good of an athlete. I don't think he's in as good of a situation. I don't think he's locked to as good of a quarterback. And so David Njoku is kind of a tier for me where, you have the big guys, you have Travis Kelce, you have Kittle, Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, the Dallas Goddards. Pat Freiermuth, I think, is like right in there. And then it's David Njoku and David Njoku, Darren Waller, a younger, older, type of situation. But both kind of in that like top 10. And I think if you don't have one of those top tight ends, you don't have anything at the tight end position, essentially. I mean, you've got to be trying to get some of those. So I think David Njoku is maybe one of the cheaper options that you can still feel like you have a solid guy at the position. And you probably won't have to replace him for a little while if you can keep this going. I mean, again, at 26 years old, he's got a pretty long lifespan for a tight end that's already produced at his level. So I think he is a buy. I think I would probably like overpay for David Njoku, probably based on his price, just because I have a lot of confidence in him and I have a lot of confidence in the Browns offense going forward.
Who in the top 8 would you buy David Njoku over?
Well, I think him and Pat Freiermuth are very close.
I think I would rather have Njoku slightly over Freiermuth.
Okay.
Just slightly. Because I think the offense is going to be geared a little bit more towards the tight end. I think Freiermuth is very heavily relied on a strong touchdown ratio. I think that's very due for a regression there.
Yeah, that's fair. Here's something I would say that might be a little hot takey, I guess. But I mean, if you were sitting at like the 111, 112 a super flex draft and you had a need at tight end, which I don't advise going for need all the time in your rookie drafts, but sometimes you're in that sort of situation. And this year, especially where the second round isn't that strong anyway, I would probably trade that 112 for David Njoku over picking Dalton Kincaid.
I mean, you
and there's a hot take. I just think that he's going to produce right away these next couple of years, and Njoku's in a good offense, and he's already kind of put in his time. I don't know that Kincaid's going to really put up those top 10 tight end numbers for the first 2 years or so. And if you're able to get a guy like Njoku at 26 years old with a good 4 to 5 years,
I simply think Kincaid's going to put up those kind of numbers simply because the bar is so low to post top 10 numbers at the tight end position. You literally just have to stay healthy for 17 games and post,
be on the field,
and 3 catches for 40 yards and score a touchdown here and there. If you do that, you're going to be a tight end 1. It's just simply the fact of the matter of the fantasy landscape that we live in today. So for me, I don't know that there's anyone in the top 9 that I would take David Njoku over, except for maybe Pat Freiermuth. And for that reason, he's more of a hold for me. Sure, I'm gauging the price where he is, but a lot of people are kind of holding steady on him. They want a little bit more than they should, which is fine. I'm a huge David Njoku fan, so I understand that. But at the same time, I also kind of want to see how Watson looks this year, because we know that a part of my sell with Njoku last year was, and it worked out, Watson targeted the tight end at a very, very high amount in Houston, despite not having really any tight ends of note while he was there. Suddenly he walks into Cleveland, he gets a borderline top 10 in David Njoku, and bam, voila, uses him a lot. But the target situation in Cleveland just keeps getting more and more robust. Elijah Moore was added, Cedric Tillman was added, Kareem Hunt was removed, but Nick Chubb is still there. And I don't know. I never know what Kevin Stefanski is going to do. It's always a mystery to me. That guy who was the pretty much unanimous coach of the year a couple of years ago didn't look like he knew how to coach last season. So
tough situation.
I agree. Yeah. But the AFC North is going to be a tough division. It's going to be a very grinded out division. We don't know if the Ravens defense is going to look as bad as they looked at times last year. The Steelers defense is always going to be good. The Bengals defense under Lou Anarumo is good. So again, it's interesting to me. I would be more looking to be net neutral on David Njoku rather than a buy. And to hear me say that is interesting. But that's kind of how I approach this.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to our last guy, and this is lining up quite nicely. If you're still sticking around at this point in the show, again, we appreciate it. If you want to help us out, go right there, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell that subscribes you to all the notifications in the bottom right corner. Again, we're having a blast doing these, and if there's any guys that you guys want to see, just feel free to leave a comment on there, and we'll address it in a future video. But we saved the best guy we thought for last, and he is the tight end 1 right now, and it is Kyle Pitts. And I don't think anybody really knows how to approach Kyle Pitts at this point. You can't really buy him because there's not really any hope in Atlanta, to make the offense pass heavy with them not investing in a quarterback and them drafting Bijan Robinson. But at the same time, you can't really sell him because his year that last year before the injury wasn't great, and then he got injured. But still, people are scared. What do you do with Kyle Pitts?
You hold Kyle Pitts. If you have Kyle Pitts, you don't do anything with him. I understand people's frustrations, I guess. Actually, I
feel like
don't.
you're
I don't. I
talking
don't
directly to me
understand.
right now.
I guess I don't understand people's frustrations. Is actually what I would say, because the whole narrative around Kyle Pitts when he came into the NFL, around these rookie tight ends we get excited about, was, well, ease your expectations because they take a little while. They don't just hit right off the bat. Kyle Pitts did. He came right in. He got 110 targets. He got 1,000 yards. He didn't score much. He scored 1 touchdown. We were all disappointed in that. But correct me if I'm wrong. I think the only tight end who had more yards than Kyle Pitts as a rookie was Mike Ditka. And Kyle Pitts may have even surpassed that. I don't think so. I think he was right behind. So he had 1,026 yards on 68 receptions. That is an unbelievable season for a rookie tight end. And we were still like, this isn't enough. We're hungry for more.
Well, he was only he was only tight end 11 in points per game. So
I
there was
totally
meat on the
understand.
bone. Meat on the bone.
I totally understand that portion of it.
Yep.
That we were expecting him to come in and be, much better than he was. But in the context of his position and the historical data of his position, he was, about as good as it gets. He comes back this next season, and it was unfortunate. The Atlanta offense was unfortunate for more than just Kyle Pitts. Anybody who had Drake London, you dealt with it too. They were not pass heavy. They were not pass. I don't even know the word I would say. Pass neutral. They were
pass negative.
They were a run heavy offense that wasn't utilizing the weapons they had. But going against Kyle Pitts or trying to sell him or trying to do anything with him based on the situation goes against so much dynasty process of what we all tell ourselves and tell other people and do all this stuff is, you buy the talent, not the situation. There's been no question of Kyle Pitts' talent since he's come into the NFL. It's only been the situation, and the situation might not last too much longer. I mean, I don't think if Desmond Ridder doesn't work this season, who they're giving a chance to, I don't think he's going to be there in 2024. If Arthur Smith really doesn't work out this year and the Falcons really don't, pull something together this season, I don't think Arthur Smith is going to be there in 2024. So this situation could change within a year, and Kyle Pitts isn't even 23 years old yet. And so we were just talking about David Njoku, being 26 years old and still in like a good age window for the tight end. Kyle Pitts could legitimately be like an alpha tight end by the time he's 23 years old and potentially give you like 10 to 11 years of this elite production. I mean, even what Travis Kelce's done over his career, he's only been doing this for like the last 5-6 seasons, and it's been incredible. But he was even a late starter, like these tight ends take time.
Yeah.
And so I think Kyle Pitts is for sure a hold because, like you said, if you're trying to buy Kyle Pitts, good luck. I mean, you got to be giving, another plenty of other elite assets, and you probably got to be replacing that other team's tight end at the same time, which is tough because there aren't too many good tight ends in the first place.
You hear that, Nick?
There aren't too many good tight ends in the first place. But yeah, man, I think he's a hold. I think selling him will be something that people are frustrated, and I understand that part of it. Like I said, he's been historically great, all these things, but it is frustrating to have a guy in an offense where they don't use him. There's no getting around that. But yeah, I think he's a for sure hold. I just don't even know I know we don't love keep cut trade. I'm just going to look it up just to see kind of what the crowdsource thing is on him. I mean, he's right up by what an early first would be, or Jahmyr Gibbs, or some of those type of guys,
which I think is nuts.
Pick 103. I mean, I don't think I would rather have Kyle Pitts than the 103 this year. I mean,
there have been leagues that I've been exploring trades for him, including a couple, one that we're in together, and I've been looking for multiple firsts and a second, a first, a very, very solid younger player, and a second, or a very, a young tight end, and the one I have in mind has been Dalton Kincaid in more situations than not, and a first round pick in a second. Like that's pretty much the lowest that I will go at that rate. And people have been saying, well, you're asking too much. And no, I'm not asking too much. I'm asking for a tight end who had a 34.3% target rate, ranked first in the NFL, a 32.9% air yard share, ranked first in the NFL, 13 deep targets, ranked first in the NFL, 59% catchable target rate, ranked 37th in the NFL. I hate you, Marcus Mariota. Get off my football team. But look, the thing with Kyle Pitts is we know he's an elite asset. So it is really tough to let him go, and it's really, but at the same time, it was tough to look at that 28 receptions on 59 targets last year. Like that is absolutely terrible, and 22nd in fantasy points per game. Like it's a struggle, but at the same time, Arthur Smith and Marcus Mariota held this offense so far last season that it is near impossible for Pitts not to improve and show us something at least similar to the output that he had in 2021. I don't think he's going to be quite there, but again, he's the best tight end asset in the game. You just cannot get rid of him for peanuts. I implore any dynasty managers that are struggling with whether to sell him or not, and that includes myself at points. Please do not sell him for peanuts. Do not sell him for just a first round pick. Do not sell him for just the 103. You can get so much more, and if you're getting at that point, just pull him off the trade market. Hold him.
Yeah, I think if you were going to consider any sort of Kyle Pitts trade, I mean, you have to be getting like an elite player back that you feel like you won't regret it, because like even picks for him, I just feel like if you were to spend that and especially a lot of dynasty leagues are tight end premium too, where you're getting extra points for what these guys do, and if he starts to really hit, you're really going to see, the downside of trading a guy like him. But I mean, there's like a select few assets in Dynasty that I would like need to be involved in a Kyle Pitts trade, involved with, even more of a package to really trade him, because, it's not only just that he did this, that he's, a highly valued player, a highly talented player. He's at a position of scarcity, like we talked about with our two other, tight ends, where there's just not that much wiggle room for elite talent. And he's one of them. And even last season, I mean, he got hurt in week 11. So he missed, 12 through 18 of the season. If you look at the numbers last year, I mean, Drake London picked up his numbers a lot that second half of the season. Like right at the end, they did start passing a little bit more. They started using their guys a little bit more. Desmond Ridder could be like a significant upgrade over what Marcus Mariota was last year. He could be somebody who passes more. Taylor Heineke could as well. I mean, I like Taylor Heineke for pass catchers. I mean, because he takes risks. Taylor Heineke is not scared to, toss the ball down the field. So yeah, Kyle Pitts is a definite hold, or buy. I mean, if you think you can buy him, that's the thing. Like if you can find somebody who is frustrated with Kyle Pitts and you can get him, for, if you haven't done your rookie drafts yet, you can get him for, these 103 to, late first, whatever you can put together and get a guy like him.
We would not suggest that.
You wouldn't suggest trading 103 for him?
Oh! If I could trade 103 for him, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
That's what I'm saying. If your rookie drafts haven't happened yet, I'm saying, and you can trade him for or you can trade one of these picks for a guy like him. I think it's something you gotta test out the waters with. And like you said, as somebody who I don't have too much Kyle Pitts, I have him on one dynasty team, and I haven't entertained any offers on him. But if you're in a league with an owner that you think might be frustrated with Kyle Pitts, and you might have maybe a more immediate answer at the tight end position, I don't think it hurts to ask, because there might be somebody who's frustrated with him.
Yep, absolutely. I definitely agree. But that concludes another episode of Dynasty Buys and Sells. And we again thank you guys for tuning in. And as always, we will be back next week. And keep an eye out for this episode to hit YouTube. We're recording this at night on Tuesday. It should be out sometime midday on Wednesday. But again, thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of High Floor Football. I'm Sam Wagman. He's Jay Arsht, and we'll see you guys next week.